Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Big rumours emerging today about the future of F1 going into 2026 and what the competitive order may potentially look like, especially the difference between the best team on the grid next year, whoever it's going to be, and some of the worst. The FIA say that as far as they are aware, based on simulation data and things they've heard from various teams, some teams next season, at least more than one, will be way off the pace of the front runners. The gap we talked about the other day was potentially about 4 seconds, but now there's further discussion as to which teams those might be, and which teams are expected nearer the front of the field. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. This is Max Verstappen, and this weekend he is racing at the Nordschleife. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with the story, let's just run through it. Here he is today, effectively getting ready to get his license, right? So it's all kind of funny and it's all kind of German. This guy is the reigning full-time Formula 1 world champion, but he has to tick every single box, and understandably, I will say, the Nordschleife is a challenging and dangerous track, but it's still pretty funny to think about Max having to effectively be a rookie here and tick all the boxes while he is mid his attempted Formula 1 title defense this season. But here he is in his Verstappen.com outfit. He will be racing as Max Verstappen, by the way. He's not going to be Franz Hermann again this time. But the Nürburgring, as a result, are expecting, and maybe some of you guys are going to attend as well, a pretty huge draw to this. They're expecting about 50,000 people tomorrow on the Saturday due to Verstappen arriving. They've opened 2 additional grandstands. They've got additional viewing areas as well because people want a glimpse of the world champion on the track. Pretty exciting stuff, I'd say. This is funny in hindsight. If you guys remember after the Italian Grand Prix, Helmut Marko said, I'm feeling pretty confident. Maybe Singapore's going to go well. Maybe in a straight line we're looking good. What about Las Vegas? Baku could be a similar story. There's some optimism for Max around there. But Marko says he's very spirited, he's very motivated. I haven't seen it in a long time. He's not talking about racing GT cars anymore either. He only said this a couple of days ago. Maybe I'll change a colour correction there so it doesn't look like I've got liver disease, but I don't know what's better really. The other one was more natural. Who cares? I'm in a hotel. It's tough sometimes to get the colour correction to work. Point is that Marko thought that Max had had enough of this GT racing stuff. But actually, no, here he is. So this is his car. It's a GT4. Now, there's quite a lot of talk about the actual car, what they're doing to the car to make it competitive with the rivals. Can Max potentially win and all of this stuff? So I'll kind of go through some of the details in a second. This is Max in his machine for the weekends, and yeah, pretty excited to see how he gets on. Now, he's not turning up here with the intention to, I mean, look, you would obviously like to win. That's not really the goal. The goal is to get his license. Basically, he needs to drive 2 different cars, or basically in 2 different stints. He needs to drive 7 clean laps without any penalties or anything. And if he does that, he ticks the boxes, and he is getting his license so he can race GT3 and better beyond. And this is the funny thing, right? So today, by the time you guys are watching this video, Max apparently was on the track with the rookies. So, all the rookies, including Max, must complete 8 laps on the circuit following an instructor who'll be telling them about the different racing lines. So I do love the idea of being the instructor. And it's not like Max is going to know everything about the Nürburgring, about the Nordschleife. He's, to be fair, probably raced it a million times on the simulator anyway. But imagine being the instructor that's taken Max out to explain to him what he needs to know about the track. Thought that was kind of cool. And as a result, Max gets no free passes in any regard. As I said at the start, it is very German. Like, he has to do all the things the other rookies have to do. He has to do all of the theory sessions. He has to do the e-learning and tick all the boxes on the internet. It's very entertaining, and absolutely no special treatment for Verstappen this weekend. Now, there was a bit of talk about his car and whether he's going to be able to compete, because his car is a Porsche Cayman GT4, usually 425 horsepower, but it's going to be detuned, and as a result, people were like, oh, there's no way he's going to be able to win, because there's this necessity for new drivers, of first-time Nordschleife participants. They have to have 4.2 kilograms of weight on the car per horsepower, whereas the standard GT4 is 3.1 kilograms per horsepower, so they would have to make this detuning. Now, it turns out that he's racing in a category where this is actually perfectly fine, so I'm not going to go through every single piece of detail here, but effectively, he's racing in a different class. There's no GT4 class, so he's racing in the Cup 3 class with other cars, with either GT4 cars which are detunes or other cars that fit the same billing. So there's no real concern that Max is going to be deeply out of contention with rivals in his category. It's possible that he could still go for the win, effectively. But yeah, that's the understanding, that yeah, he's going to be racing with the detuned car because he's not allowed to drive a more powerful one because he's a rookie. But he's going to be competing in a class without the other 425 horsepower Porsche Cayman GT4s. That should be okay. The goal in the near term is as follows. Max says, racing is not only my profession, but also my hobby. This weekend I'll be at the Nordschleife with the goal of obtaining the mandatory racing license needed to race it in a GT3, because I would love to do that. The Nordschleife is at the top of the list of circuits I want to race on. Extremely challenging, extremely demanding, enormous length and tight, historic layout. I cannot wait, he says. Now, if he achieves what I mentioned, if he drives the 14 laps without getting penalties, and he ticks the boxes required, and he gets his license as a result, then he is apparently looking at his first GT3 race to be in just a couple of weekends. It's not like Max is saying, oh, well, I'll just do this now, get the license, and I'll come back to it in the off-season or next year. No, Max wants to race every weekend, every day if he could, because next weekend, on the, what is today, the Friday, so next weekend is the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku on the 21st or whatever. Then the weekend after that, there's no Grand Prix. The weekend after that is the Singapore Grand Prix. And apparently in between, Max is looking at potentially racing at a GT3 race then, if he gets the required license. So, not really sure what Helmut Marko is yapping about when he said that Max is no longer interested in racing GT3 cars or GT cars in general. It seems like he kind of still is. Now, speaking of Max, let's transition the talk towards 2026. This is pretty interesting. Max at the Red Bull Powertrains factory, of course, now kind of partnered with Ford, as we know, but he's there with the Red... I mean, it's so funny, isn't it, right? As if he's walking around with the Red Bull can in hand, right? Like, this is clearly orchestrated for the shot. He's got the Red Bull can. He's probably wearing some AlphaTauri clothing or whatever, right? You know, I don't want to do any free advertising for them. It's pretty funny. Surprised there's no Red Bull can in the background of this as well. But Laura McKees, this is Max Verstappen. This image we have Helmut Marko, as you guys can just about see on the right-hand side. And the other fella is Ben Hodgkinson. Now, he joins Red Bull Powertrains, of course, when it was under Horner a couple of years back now, I think 2022, something like that. I actually just went on his LinkedIn out of interest, because apparently we do that now here on the channel. And if you guys scroll down a little bit, you'll know that from 2001 to 2022, he worked, yeah, so I'm about right, he worked for Mercedes as their head of mechanical engineering in the high-performance powertrains division. So, was he the critical piece behind the success that Mercedes had and the dominant engine they built in 2014? He was definitely a key part of it. Most of the credit seems to go to Andy Cowell, who, as we know, is now Aston Martin's boss, basically. He's not technically team principal with Mike Krack and everything, but within reason, he is calling the shots over there at Aston Martin. But clearly Ben Hodgkinson was also a very key component, and it's just kind of interesting to see him at the Red Bull factory with Max and everything, and they're clearly making him quite a key part of this discussion. Maybe giving some optimism to the future of their engine, but there are some concerns from some as to whether that's actually going to be what happens or not. Yuki wants to prove his seat to Red Bull. He's got until Mexico, we understand, to try and do that. It's going to be a challenge. The other driver who is very much at risk right now is Flavio Briatore's Franco Colapinto. Of course, not Flavio Briatore, but Briatore will call the shots. As we know, this is what he likes to do. Even if he's not technically the team principal, he makes the decisions. And Gasly is to stay. He's signed that extension until 2028, which is pretty long term, to be fair, but I don't think Gasly has a better option, and there is a lot of optimism, and for good reason I would say, about next year's Mercedes power unit, which of course Alpine will be inheriting. So Gasly's there for some time to come. He succeeded in winning the French Civil War last year against Esteban Ocon. The other driver is a good question. There were rumours that there was interest from Alpine in Bottas and Perez, but of course Bottas and Perez are now both at Cadillac. So what other options are there? Because if you are Briatore, Colapinto, while he's not been good, he does at least bring in more sponsor interest than Jack Doohan did. Like, is Colapinto any better than Doohan? You know, okay, Doohan didn't get that long, but to me it seems like they've performed at a relatively similar level. I don't imagine that if Doohan had not been fired, things would have been much different to where they are today with Colapinto, to be honest. But Colapinto does bring in some more money, so if you're going to do anything, Briatore would probably keep him over Doohan. I don't expect Doohan to get that seat back, unfortunately for him. There has been talk about Yuki as a result. Yuki and Gasly, they made a pretty good lineup back at AlphaTauri. Maybe there's an argument that that could work as well here. Just don't know what other options that they would really be considering. Of course, there's plenty out there you could go for, but, you know, I don't expect Briatore to be bringing Mick Schumacher back in. Look, there's always going to be a new Formula 2 champion that could be considered as well, and older Formula 2 champions that never got the chance, but just something to think about with Alpine. The other just brief update before we discuss 2026, Sainz, his penalty is going to get reviewed today. And their chances on paper seem relatively slim because usually when there's a right of review held, nothing happens, right? Like, out of the last 13, only 3 were successful. The most recent one was in 2023 at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which was extremely controversial for multiple reasons. And there are a couple of other ones in recent time as well. Alonso did it again, and then back in 2020 when Red Bull got Hamilton penalised in Austria. So, yeah, it very rarely happens, and I'm not exactly sure what Williams will say. And Sainz has already served this penalty, as we know, so it's not really like he can do much about it now. I think the intention is to get some sort of clarification on how these rules really work. But let's talk about 2026. There are going to be major differences next year in performance. Right now, I think what I will say is kind of enjoy this year while it lasts in terms of the competitiveness. I think next season is going to be more interesting than this season, just from because there's going to be so much to talk about, so many different angles, so many changes in the regulations. Like, the amount of technical directives that next year is going to have is probably going to be off the charts based on all the little technical details that may be necessary to change on the engine and on the hybrid deployment and all of this stuff that currently we don't understand. But to the credit of these current regulations, the parity is very impressive, right? You look at the recent qualifying sessions, you know, you're getting Q1s, all the drivers are within a second of one another, right? Best to worst, it's a second difference per lap, which is extremely impressive given where Formula 1 has been for the vast majority of its history. The cars are typically very reliable. It does cause problems in the sense that if you're a faster car further down the field, having the required delta to actually make an overtake happen is challenging. It means that DRS trains are even more sticky because there's nothing that you could do because of the dirty air. You might need a performance delta of at least half a second a lap to realistically make an overtake happen. But if you're not getting that, then unless you have a tyre offset, or the guy in front makes a mistake, it's just not going to happen, right? So I think in qualifying, it's made qualifying performances recently very interesting. The quali sessions have been great this year, no doubt, but the races maybe as a result somewhat more underwhelming. But it is the norm in the history of Formula 1 for the gap between the best and the worst to be far more substantial than 1 second over a single lap. And frankly, it is inevitable that that is what is going to occur again. These couple of comments were really made about the engines for 2029, 2030 and beyond. They actually delayed their meeting on it because the understanding is there was just going to be no consensus at all, and as a result, they've just delayed that discussion because for now there's a lot more focus probably required on 2026. So this is in the Italian, but we'll scroll up and talk about what he has to say in the English. This is Nicholas Tombazis, the director of F1 single-seaters, and this is what he has to say. So the 400km/h number that Toto Wolff was throwing around, they say that that's not going to be too much of a concern. It would be doable, but they're going to limit the output of the electrical component to make sure that those kind of safety concerns don't get raised to such a great extent. But the key discussion of the day is what the kind of gap is going to be between the best and the rest. Now, the FIA are concerned, and understandably, about the ICE, the hybrid, the way that's going to work. There's loads of rules they're introducing, and I'm sure they're going to keep changing them over time in terms of how you can deploy the energy at certain parts of the lap. It is going to be a big mess. Some teams are going to get that right. There is a real feeling right now that the teams that, and even the drivers that are able to manage the energy the best, they will just win. Like, that will be the win condition for teams. And this is the, to some extent, I imagine, frustrating thing for somebody like Adrian Newey. He's sitting there in the Aston Martin factory, probably cooking up aerodynamically an absolute rocket ship. It might be, an absolutely wonderful thing that Newey creates with some incredibly, and other teams could do this as well, but hypothetically, the teams are putting a lot of work into their aero design. Newey has implied in recent interviews that there are loopholes or things that he's found in the regulations that he's happy and excited to exploit. The active aerodynamics is going to be very exciting. The reality is, there's a very good chance that the upcoming championships are determined purely on engine reliability, engine performance, and even if Newey creates a remarkable car aerodynamically, or any other great designer, James Allison at Mercedes, could be another argument there. It might not matter if the engine isn't good enough, and who knows what Honda are going to do, who knows what Ferrari are going to do. There is good reason to believe that Mercedes should be in a solid spot, but Tom Bassis says the following. The 57-year-old native of Athens, because he's Greek, says he has little doubt that more than one team will not be ready to start the next regulatory cycle. And that's, it's not even like they will be behind. It's that they just won't be ready. Like, they're not even close. There's so much stuff, a revolution of enormous proportions that will catch several teams unprepared. He was very frank on this point. This is why he believes that they will, misunderstanding of regulations will inevitably lead to performance losses. The burden will create significant performance differences between the various cars. So he believed, this is the head of the FIA saying that across basically all domains, not the head, he's not the president, but he's the head of the single-seater department anyway, and is a very well-respected engineer in his own right. He thinks that some teams are going to misunderstand these regulations to such an extent on the engine and on the chassis side that they will be compromised for probably the entirety, at least some of these teams, of this regulatory period. This is why, for a team like Cadillac, yes, it makes sense probably bring in Bottas, bring in Perez, but for those drivers, it's not like they can expect to join Cadillac and within 3 to 6 months be competing for race wins or podiums, right? Like, the teams that are behind, maybe it's Cadillac, maybe it's not, who knows, but whoever is, they will have a long way to go, and there is a lot of understanding that is difference, let's say, between the best and the rest. Now, who's going to be top? Good question. Obviously, people are talking about Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari have been understandably thrown into that mix as well, and we're not expecting those teams that we just mentioned, given their resources and everything to that effect, to really struggle at the start of the new regulations, but there will be teams that do. There's been talk about Audi, of course, and what they're looking at. Of course, things are looking better recently with Sauber, their engine program. They're hiring some key guys from Ferrari, to our understanding, over the last few days. But the teams that don't get it right, who knows? Some of the backmarkers right now, Haas, let's say, they might struggle a little bit with their integrations. And remember, when we talked about these rumours a couple of weeks ago now, the rumour was that in terms of simulation data, the best teams were giving the FIA times that were 4 seconds a lap faster than the worst teams. So that is the kind of, number to look at. And if the current gap between the top cars is a couple of tenths here or there, you could expect that to spread out somewhat in the upcoming seasons. That would not be a massive surprise. So very much into your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.